friends. Welcome to the Creative Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Caldwell, and I'm so happy you're here. Each episode, I take some time to chat with fellow artists about life, faith, and the impact of the arts. Friends, I'm so glad that you're joining us today for this conversation. If you're looking for encouragement and inspiration, you are in the right place. Today is episode 93, and my guest is Tehillah Hartmann. Tehillah is the founder of the Being Salt dance community, where she helps dancers to integrate their dance and faith and experience deep connection to God through guided movement meditations, coaching, and workshops. I loved hearing about Tehillah's personal journey, really connecting faith and dance in her own life, and how that developed into her ministry called Being Salt. We chat about topics like identity, how God can speak to us and shift the atmosphere through movement, seasons of life as a dancer, the power of community, embodied prayer, and so much more. This is one of those conversations that I could go back and listen to over and over again because there's just so many nuggets of wisdom, and I love Tehillah's heart. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy my conversation with Tehillah Hartmann. Well, Tehillah, this is so fun to get to finally meet you. We were just talking about how this has been a very long time coming because we have so many mutual friends and people in the dance space. So I feel like there's been so many people that have said, you need to have Tehillah on the podcast.
And
I've been wanting to. So it's just like the Lord's timing of today's the day.
Yeah, I'm honored. I love every guest that you've had on.
Thank you.
So that's great.
Thank you so much. Well, it's super fun. I'm just going to turn it over to you for a second. If you want to introduce yourself and let our listeners know kind of what you are up to currently, and then we'll jump into a lot of really fun topics. I'm super excited. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Tehillah, and I am in Houston, Texas with my husband and two kids. Right now, I've got a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. So I'm in this very crazy season of like, am I ever going to dance again? And I know dance is part of my life forever, but right now it looks like just grooving in my kitchen a whole lot.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I run an online ministry called Being Salt. The whole point of it is just to minister to trained and non-trained dancers. So there's a community online, and it's just releasing coaching and resources and doing workshops to really help people just connect to the Lord and find his spirit inside their dancing body. And I mean, we'll get into this later, but I know for myself, I grew up just feeling that divorce inside of like, okay, I've got my faith life and I've got my dance life, but they don't mix. And when they did mix and when they found kind of reconciliation, it was just the most beautiful and healing thing for me. So I feel really passionate about helping dancers and helping, non-trained dancers just even discover like the breadth of God that they can experience him inside of their bodies. So that's what Being Salt is all about. And I'm kind of doing that on the side of motherhood and asking God lots of questions about the future. So,
yes, I love that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
So good. And I love what you're doing. I've kind of been like at a distance seeing what you're doing for a while. And today I was diving more into like your Instagram account and stuff. And it was just really refreshing and fun to see all that's out there. I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to be following this. So
thank you.
Yeah, so many good things. And I think that made me even more excited to talk to you because now I'm like, okay, so many topics that we could go into, but we'll just see where we go.
Yeah.
So
I'm here for it. I'm an open book.
Love it. So I would love for you to just share a little bit more of your story, maybe like your early years and kind of what got you into dance and how that journey was just through like growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I grew up as a pastor's kid. Both my parents are pastors of a non-denominational church. And so I had this beautiful just blessing of being able to dance in worship in church. And it just was, even though I was the only dancer there, because my parents are the pastors, there was some support behind it.
Right.
So I grew up just having like an experience of really free and unhindered worship. Like I remember just dancing in the back and having all my friends dance with me. And then as we got older, they kind of get too old to dance, and realizing, I hit a certain age where I was like, I'm the only one back here still. And I think that's because other people, like in my mind, everyone danced. And if you were a kid, you just danced.
Yeah.
So as I got older into the middle school years and people kind of dropped off and they're like, actually, I'm going to go to kids' church, or I'm going to go sit with my family in the pew, it was like, oh, maybe I do have something. Maybe I like this better than other people,
Right.
than other kids my age.
Uh-huh.
That was my upbringing, was that a lot of my love for dance and the joy of dance was birthed in the presence of God in places of worship. It wasn't until I started seriously training in dance, and I remember going to like a Russian ballet school for a year. If anybody's taken ballet or is familiar with the Russian ballet school, it is so intense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like, ugh. And I'm so thankful. I mean, the Lord really rescued me from there. I didn't spend more than a year there. So I think a lot of myself was preserved, like I didn't have any eating disorders, which a lot of my friends did. I didn't struggle with, like crazy body image stuff. I think because I was just there for a year.
Gotcha.
So he really kind of rescued me from that a little bit. And I'm not saying, of course, people can go to a Russian ballet school and come out unscathed, but
right.
the chances for me having that story were slim. So it was good that I left. But it was around that time, kind of in those middle school years, that I really started just getting so serious about my training that I just like forgot. Well, I don't even know if I forgot as much as I just stopped prioritizing that freedom in worship feeling. The problem is that I had started to become known in my church as the dancer. And like, if there was a worship moment happening, they'd be like, call up Tehillah. We need dance. There's breakthrough happening, And so as I got more and more serious with the training aspect and just really like focusing on that and valuing it really highly, I got less and less accustomed and familiar with that worship and breakthrough space. But I was still a pastor's kid. So I would find myself in these like conference settings or women's retreats or something where I'm the only kid. And there would be a worship moment and people would say, like, bring up Tehillah, like, we need the breakthrough. We need the physical release,
Yeah.
And I just found myself being really afraid, ashamed, just feeling like a total fraud because I hadn't been practicing dancing in God's presence. I had only been practicing my technique. And so there was just a lot of friction in that time and space of like those middle school, high school years where I found myself tiptoeing into the worship space again and being like, yeah, I can do this. I own this. And then just realizing how quickly it was like, wow, I'm not familiar in this space anymore. Like, this is really hard for me to actually flow with the Spirit, to hear his voice again, to feel like I have something to offer. And I think a lot of that was just because I was so hyper focused on the perfection of technique and the working hard and like, oh, if I can't do fouettes on stage, then like, what is this worth?
Exactly. That is how it feels though sometimes.
I don't know what it is when you're a kid that you're like, grand jetés and fouettes are like the epitome of excellent dance.
So true. So true.
If there's a swell in the music, man, you better believe I'm preparing for 50 fouettes. Anyway.
So true.
Yeah. So I found myself just in this place of friction and kind of consistently hitting up, just against this wall of like, I am at war with my own identity. And I could feel the Lord calling me back to that place of childlike wonder and that home that I had in him. But it was hard for me to like let go of the idol of like, no, but I have to be great and I have to be good. I'm working so hard for that well done, good and faithful servant, but it's totally misplaced. It's not actually in my technique. It was, the Lord is just wanting me to come and breathe with him and be with him. So I remember there was one specific weekend where somebody was like, okay, Tehillah, you got to go up and go dance. It's a worship moment. And I just refused. I was like, no, I'm good. I'm going to stay in the back here. I was giving off major, like, leave me alone vibes. Right. Like, I'm going to have my own moment with the Lord. And really, I was just hiding. I was just like way too afraid to get up there because it's funny, like the more proficient I became in my technique, the less able I felt in a worship setting.
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the more paralyzed I felt because I was just so focused on the technique and the how to do it part of dance instead of just being, being with the Lord. And so I remember one of my mentors like physically pushed, I think she could just tell that I was in this really tough spot. And she just physically pushed me up onto the stage space and said, "Go, Tehillah, just go." And I was like physically resisting her, like, no, no, no. But then when
Yeah.
you're up on the stage, you're like, okay, I'm gonna just pretend that I meant to do that. I'm gonna pretend that I'm in the moment with the Lord. And I'll never forget I was dancing and I don't even remember what I was doing. I remember doing a lot of just like ronda jumps
Yeah.
and like trying to make them look holy. And
Uh-huh.
I just remember thinking in my head, like, nobody believes you.
Mm.
Nobody, nobody believes this. You are not like, this isn't good. Think of something else to like, do something else. Think of something else to do. Nobody is getting moved by this. Nothing's happening. And I didn't even get breakthrough in that moment. I actually ended up just collapsing like in the corner on a stage and just weeping in my hands.
Mm.
And somebody pushed me a tissue box and they were just like, I think, and then the worship band kind of just moved on. I think people could tell, like, she's going through something. And I'm just desperately hoping that they think it's like a God thing, even
Mhm.
though I internally am just like totally paralyzed and feel ashamed and feel like a failure. Like I couldn't,
Mm.
man, I couldn't deliver, I couldn't deliver when people needed it.
Mm.
And ultimately, I got so much healing from that weekend because after that, it was like that was the initial crack that needed to happen in my heart to really recognize like my need and my frailty and my, oh my gosh, I'm so far from home, Lord. Please bring me back home. I don't even know how to get there myself.
Mhm.
And so I remember getting prayer that weekend from a lot of women older than me and people just, speaking to my heart, prophesying over me and just really feeling this conviction again of like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like if I have all the accolades in the world, if I can do every single step of ballet perfectly, like if I can't feel at home with God in my dancing body, like if I can't do what I was called to do, which is to release his presence through movement, then everything else just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
Mm.
So I think my high school and college years were kind of about walking that out in a way that was like, all right, well, I still feel called to work hard, I
Yeah.
still feel called to pursue dance, but figuring out how to do that, while keeping Jesus as Lord in my heart was, that was like, okay, this is the name of the game now.
Right. I mean, it is a challenge in a way because that's not the norm in the dance culture, I feel like, where there's so many other things that we're focusing on and that tend to be like, this is what you should be focusing on in your dancing, and kind of that competitive nature of it. And yeah, so I can totally relate to how that's a struggle to kind of figure out how to walk that out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think what's funny to me now that I'll be 33 this year now, at the time it was like, this is my whole world. Like, cause when you're young, you just think, I don't know, you're just
Yeah.
focused on like year 15. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been 15 years since then. And
Right.
I'm still working it out. I'm still walking out this tension. So a lot of my life since then has just been, whether it be in the college setting, pursuing a degree in dance at the University of Michigan, where I'm like the only Christian there, then moving to Houston, Texas, and joining Dam and dancing with like, a Christian company, and then joining a secular company for like 5 years and teaching, and then becoming a mom and stopping, all performance, like it in all these
Right.
kind of these different seasons and contexts. There's just always been this again, like, does dance belong to you, Lord? Is this ultimately about you and me and our relationship, or is it still an idol, in all these different kind of various life stages? So
Right.
yeah, that's kind of been my path, and I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing just your journey in that. And I think it helps kind of lay the foundation and the backdrop in a way for all these things we're going to be talking about as well and kind of diving into. And something that I love about what you're doing with Being Salt is helping people to recognize their own sort of individual voice as a dancer, as a mover, in worship. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. So the idea of like each person having a voice, and what does it look like to be authentic to that?
Yeah.
Especially in a world where, we tend to want to match something, like we're trying to fit a mold or be like that dancer or whatever, that kind of thing. It's definitely a struggle. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that and kind of what's brought you to that as one of the main things you're doing with being salt.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well, being salt, those words mean actually like what they kind of mean for me, and what I hope to just impart to other dancers is literally like your own flavor. And the more that you embrace the salt that God has given you and the salt that he's put inside of you, the more that you like taste that and understand that and kind of really embrace it. And I would say you do that by spending time with God and spending time in his presence and cultivating your dance voice of like, okay, Lord, what does it mean for me to move in this combination? A choreographer may have given me this to do, or a teacher may have set this piece on me, or so whatever, I'm learning this off of a video, but what does it look like or mean for me to own this? And so just the word salt, that's like been just a word I feel like that God has given me years ago, just as a reminder of like, Tehillah, every time that you want to fit in or follow the status quo or impress other people or, join that company, get into that job or, fit in somehow.
Right. Yeah.
Like you need to remember that you are the salt, which means you lead, you don't follow. And the only way to do that is to really experience God's pleasure over your own being and then embrace that wholeheartedly. So like that might look like for me on a practical level, that means like loving my body looks like saying, okay, well, as much as I trained so hard in ballet, I have a certain shape of hip that gives me or limits my turnout, right?
Yeah.
So it means that God's dream for me as a dancer, when he dreamed me up in his heart, that he's like, I'm going to create Tehillah. She's going to be born into the world. She's going to be a dancer and she's going to have this hip shape. That means that like there are certain limitations and certain accessibility that I had in my turnout, which means that I can either like hate that about myself, or I can say, wow, Lord, the salt that you've given me, like this gives me a certain voice. I have a certain capacity to express you and express what you've put inside of me through my hips, like through my turnout. And it's this range of motion, like obviously we can work on stuff. Yeah. But so it's kind of like on those practical levels of just really embracing, like, what does it look like for me to honor and like ferociously uphold the salt that God has placed inside of me and forsake looking at other people's flavor and looking at other people, how they season the world. Like the way that I'm going to be the most effective on earth is by seasoning everyone else around me, by being myself in the full strength that God has made me to be, whether that's as a teacher or a mom or in a studio or in a worship set. Like my dance is going to shine through because I'm committed to, it sounds cheesy, but like to being myself in the concept, like in the way that the Lord has created me to be,
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
For sure. Yeah, totally. That is perfect because it's so easy and we can so quickly get drawn into that mindset of we aren't enough, or I don't know, just that we aren't where we want to be. And yes, we continue to work on things and grow towards excellence and to work on our craft. But I think what you're saying is so true. And I feel like that's what we really value. And when we watch other dancers too, a lot of times is when we see them being themselves authentically in their movement.
That's so true.
And we're like, wow, that's so great, but somehow we get caught up in our own kind of insecurities. But I love that encouragement to we have our own flavor. We have our own seasoning that we're bringing to those around us, and just such a good encouragement. So thanks for diving into that a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So something that you mentioned kind of in the pre-interview stuff that we did is the idea of, and you mentioned it also in your story, just how you started to see how God can speak to you through your dance and through movement. And then kind of on the flip side of that, also how that can shift the atmosphere around us. So kind of also in us and around us. Yeah. So when did you, well, it sounds like you kind of knew that even as a little girl, but how did that thought and that idea develop, and how have you seen it play out?
Yeah, I think when I was little, it was kind of innate. Like there was, when you're young and somebody says like God speaks to you, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
And there's not much questioning until you're older, and then you're like, does God speak to me?
Right. Yeah, I know. As a child, it's like just, just faith and like, yeah. Yeah. So true.
Yeah. Like my dad said that that's what happens. So that's what happens.
Yeah,
And there's just nothing else. There's no other questioning about it. But I think where it started to really, there was a battle for that for me in my high school years of really like gripping onto the truth that it's like, no, the Lord does think my dance is important. And even if I'm the only dancer in my church, or I'm the only Christian at my studio, like this intertwining, this joining of spirit and body is real, And so I think in my high school years that was a real battle to just be like, no, this is authentic. This is from the Lord. By the time I got to college, I was standing more on solid ground with that concept of just like, yes, the Lord does speak to me and he does release things through me as I move. So I remember in college, I went to a totally secular, like kind of, just like hates Christianity
Yeah.
department, which I know a lot of people are familiar with that.
Yeah.
But I remember going like before rehearsal, before class, I'd be the only one in the studio, and I would just dance and worship in the space until I felt kind of a shift in the atmosphere. And I didn't have language for what I was doing until I went to ministry school after graduating college.
Cool.
And I heard somebody say like, we're taking authority over the space. And I just said, oh, that's what we're doing. And instantly it was like, oh,
this makes sense.
That's what I was doing. Yeah. Like I understand that now. So I think ministry school gave language for this of prophetic dance. And yes, God can speak to us through movement, and he can shift the atmosphere as we participate with him and connect with his heart. But that was tested again when I came to Houston and I started dancing in a secular company where I was dancing all the time. And I just felt really heavy. I felt heavy in my marriage and heavy in my spirit, heavy when I went to work. It was hard to like find the joy in movement. And I remember talking to my mom, and she said, Tehillah, I think you need to start dancing again. And I was like, I'm dancing 36 hours a week, Mom.
Right.
Like how else should I, like, I don't think that's really where the breakthrough is going to come from.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I think you need to start dancing in your room for Jesus again, because that was me as a young girl and in high school. Like that was where I got a lot of breakthrough, was just that communal space with him.
Yeah.
That's actually where I started the Being Salt Instagram. It was initially just a journal, just documenting my prayer times with the Lord.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you scroll way, 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 way back to the beginning, it's just me like in my room.
Love that.
Dancing away. Yeah. But I remember like taking her at her word and turning on some worship music, quieting my space, quieting my heart. And as I began to move, it was like, when the faucet is clogged, but you have to just like turn on the water. And as the water comes, it'll push out the gunk. I guess not all the time, but that's how it felt internally. It was like, I just have to turn the faucet on and the drips are going to become a rush. Right. So as I started dancing and moving and worshiping, it was like, okay, I'm feeling the life again. I'm feeling an inflow that I don't get when I'm just journaling. I don't get this when I'm just reading the Bible. I don't get this when I'm just talking to a friend or doing prayer ministry. And I love all those things. But there was something about when I started to move my body and talk to God in like the prayer language that he'd given me, there was a new life to it. There was new joy, a new rush of, oh, okay, I'm home again. And so I think that was when it was just a big reminder to me, like, yes, God does speak through movement. And whether it's not necessarily like this audible voice of where I do a movement and he's like, that means I love you. It's just that as I'm dancing, there's a confirmation in my spirit where my spirit is like, yeah, you're home. And my spirit is connecting to his spirit. And there's a communication happening there. And I realized the more I did that in my space, then I took it back to my work and back to my kitchen and to all these places where I go. And I would start to commune again and bring that secret space to the public place. And I would feel again what I felt in college of like, okay, this is the atmosphere is shifting. This conversation with a peer was able to happen. And I think it's because I was in the right place because I danced just 10 minutes prior, you know? So it's something that I'm really passionate about, especially like teaching other dancers, because I think so many of us just think like, well, I don't hear God that way, or I've always danced, but my relationship with God is other. It's different than my movement. And I just want to say, like, when you realize how much God loves your dance and how much he is so attracted to your movement, because he's like, I made you, baby girl. I made you for this, you know, like I crafted your whole being and I knew what kind of technique you were going to possess at this age and what situation you were going to be like. Just come and let me relish in you a little bit. When you experience that as you're dancing and moving, there's just like nothing like it. And I think so many of us have this idea that if I'm dancing and God speaks to me, it's going to be like an audible voice, or it's going to be a thus saith the Lord moment. And there's just so many ways that he loves to communicate with us. So sometimes as I'm dancing, I'll get a picture in my mind of the Lord dancing over me, or it'll be like a movie screen play out where I'm like, oh, the Lord's inviting me and we're dancing underwater and we're like merman and mermaid and we can breathe under there and we're doing this duet under the waves. or I will see or hear a word, you know, just a word like faithfulness, or I feel his gut instinct rise up in me of like, you know what's happening right now is that God is laughing over the lies of the enemy. You know, there's so many different ways that God speaks to us. And I love what that verse in the Bible says when he's talking about my sheep hear my voice. There's a line in there that says, my sheep hear my voice and they know my voice because they are familiar with me. They're not familiar with the voice of the enemy. And I think this is just my guess, but I have this belief that I think so many dancers and people in general are actually hearing God's voice, but they're honestly so familiar with it that they discredit it because they don't think it's him. You know, they're like, no, that's just my own brain, or, oh, that was just a weird thought. That was the pizza I ate last night. And I'm like, I think it's just so familiar to you that you don't necessarily know how easy it is to hear God and to commune with him as you're moving. So I love like encouraging dancers in that and helping people even just connect the dots of like, oh, I think that actually was the Lord, because it's so much easier than, you know, it's not for superstars. It's not for people. I mean, I should know.
So
like, if I can hear his voice, anybody can hear his voice.
I love that he speaks to each of us individually, and he can be moving in all of our lives at the same time, which is just so cool. It's kind of mind blowing, but also super amazing. So it's interesting thinking about like how this really is, I think, more of a lifelong pursuit then, and like a lifelong practice of just being with the Lord. And something that I love about just what you've been talking about in your story and what you show through Being Salt is how that shifts over time, and, you know, how our dance journey is going to change in different seasons of life. And I think that's something I've been experiencing because I'm not, you know, actively performing or taking class right now. And it's easy to just kind of be like, okay, I'm not doing dance and I'm just kind of chilling. But how even today, just because I was like inspired by watching the videos, I was like, you know what, I'm going to like just worship and pray and just like dance for the Lord in my living room. And just, that God can still use and speak through something that feels so basic or simple to us, probably, you know, especially having been like through all these years of training and all of that. Like I'm rambling a little bit.
No, I'm totally tracking with you.
How this is like a through line that God's like, I want to meet you there, no matter what age you are. If you can have an amazing batma or like, you know, turns or anything, doesn't have to be part of it. So what is your what has been your experience with just the shifting of seasons, maybe especially going into motherhood, and
Yeah.
what it looks like to, I guess, let go maybe of some past seasons and then move into the new season? Because that can be a real challenge, I feel like, for myself, but also a lot of dancers that I know. It can be a struggle to actually let go of some of those things that we've been really accustomed to, you know?
Yes. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I'll just say that it's hard. And I think what's hard about it is that there is this sense that you have internally of like, okay, do I have to put this on the shelf? Is this a dream that's died? Am I ever going to dance again? And I think the hope that I feel like, again, right now, my current season is one of pressing in and like fighting for that calling. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm fighting to get my body back and get my technique back so that I can get back on the stage. It's that this is a gift that God has given me, and I am called to dance in some capacity. And stewarding that in my current season looks very different than it has in past seasons.
Yeah.
But I feel the Lord being like, don't give up on this. Don't let this go. This is between you and me, honey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'll share this. There's actually a covenant of salt in the Bible. That's in the Old
Really?
Testament. It's mentioned a couple times. Yeah. And it's the first time I discovered it was last summer, like maybe a year ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, my whole like mission in life makes sense right now.
I love that.
Because I discovered this
Yeah.
phrase, the covenant of salt. And basically what it was is that when you sat down at a table, people would share salt. They would pass salt between themselves to make covenant. So it was very common in ancient Israel and in other religions too, to like break bread and share a meal to seal a promise or a covenant of relationship.
Yeah.
And so they have this covenant of salt where you're sharing salt with somebody else. Where this comes up is Leviticus chapter 2. It says, season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all of your offerings.
Mm-hmm.
It says, never forget to add salt to your grain offerings. And that word covenant is berit in the Greek. It means compact, pledge, treaty, agreement. This is one of the most theologically important words in the Bible. It appears more than 250 times in the Old Testament.
Wow.
A berit may be made between individuals, between a king and his people, or by God with his people. So here, God's irrevocable pledge is that he will be God to Abraham and all of his descendants forever. So that's the Abrahamic covenant. And it's the foundation stone of all of Israel's theology and their relationship to God.
Mm.
So as salt was considered this like necessary ingredient of daily food. So all of the sacrifices that were made to Yahweh in the temple had to have salt. And it was this way of the people, when they would bring their grain offerings to the Lord, they would choose salt as a way to like seal and bind their agreement, bind their promise, bind their relationship with him.
Mm.
So I was praying about this of like, okay, what does this mean for us as dancers and worshipers? What does this mean to like never leave salt out of the grain offering? I really feel like it means don't leave yourself out of the picture.
Mm.
Like bring all of yourself to the table, which means that you're not going to only come when you have a good technique day. You're not going to come to the Lord only when you feel all cleaned up and spiffy. You're not going to come to the Lord only when life is going well and your dance feels fluid and your body feels oiled and you're like, I've been practicing this. I'm in a ministry. I'm on a team. Don't just bring the salt then. Like bring the salt of yourself at every time you come and do an offering. So I open with that, and I want to say that because so much of our lives, like the majority of our lives, are not spent in a studio. They're not spent on a stage. So if you are communing with God and you consider yourself a Christian and you have a relationship with God, that means anytime, like if you are dancing in your kitchen or dancing with your kids or preparing to teach a class and you're setting up all your props, like anytime you're about to enter in and give God an offering of praise or thanksgiving through your work, through your motherhood, through the work of your hands that isn't even dance, like bring all of yourself to the table. Don't forget the salt of your life. And what that is that the Lord is like, okay, now there's this exchange of salt that happens. You're bringing yourself to me, flaws and all, and I, in return, am bringing all of myself to you. There's salt happening between us. We're exchanging salt between us,
Yeah.
which makes it about connection and relationship, which is a really long intro to say that exists, that covenant exists at every point in your journey. So it's not just when you're like, I'm a dancer and I'm dancing with this company and we are doing outreaches in Mexico and we're, preaching the gospel through our movement. That's awesome and wonderful.
Yeah.
But that is like a sliver of your life.
Right. Yeah.
That's such a good offering and it's true. But the rest of your life that is hidden and unseen and not on a stage and maybe not even like super apparent as far as like this definitely gives God worship this moment when I'm cleaning my room.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
or when I'm just like doing a workout and I hate waking up early and I'm doing this workout anyway, like this doesn't feel like worship, right?
Yeah.
But in all of these seasons, like for me right now in motherhood, it has felt like the call I feel on myself is like, do not forget the salt of your grain offering, Tehillah. Like, do not forget this in the midst of the swirl of motherhood and not being in class, feeling very rusty, feeling like you don't even know how to dance anymore. Don't forget that this is our covenant. This is about you and me. This belongs to us and nobody can take this away. This is a promise I've made with you.
Yeah.
So it means that then my call to action is about investing in that relationship and bringing dance to the table. Like, because it's so easy for me to just be like, okay, I'll just journal about it, Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just going to read the Bible and I'll save the dance for when I feel up to it, and I've taken a class and now I can really move with you, Jesus, but it's like, well, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to get warmed up and get prepared and feel good about my body. I just have to come. I just have to come right now. So that covenant of salt has been really showing up for me again in this current season I've been in with motherhood and like not having any immediate outlet for dance because there's just this push I feel in my spirit that where God is like, do not let this go, Tehillah. Like we've come a long way, but this is about you and me. Like this is about our relationship with dance and it can happen at any point, but don't forget yourself. Don't leave dance on the back burner. And that's sometimes so hard
Yeah.
just to be like, okay, I'm going to show up, Lord. I'm going to move my body, even though I don't feel like it, even though there's all these judgments that are coming up in my mind, but I'm going to move anyway, because I believe your word. I believe that this promise is for us. And I'm choosing to say yes to this. You're worthy of this.
Just so beautiful. I love that picture of the covenant of salt. I hadn't heard that, I don't think, before. So that's really, really cool. Yeah. Just to see it from a different perspective too. I think that's maybe one of the areas where we tend to just kind of like read through and we're not really soaking in like, wait, what does this even mean? And what was that for them? And how does this apply today? Super cool. Speaking of salt and being salt, when did this kind of vision for being salt really first get planted in you? And then how did it get started?
Oh man. I'm very much a gal that's like, if I have had vision, it almost never looks like that in the moment. So I didn't really have a vision for being salt. I started the Instagram account just as more of an accountability for myself.
Yeah.
And then I was listening to a business podcast. Never thought I'd be a business person ever. And they were like, this business podcast was like, there is something that you have that is so easy for you that other people need help with. And that is your business. And I was like, okay, well, what would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, okay, it doesn't have to be rocket science. Like, and I think what was encouraging is that this podcast specifically was like, the thing that you're good at is going to feel so normal to you.
Right.
You're going to feel like everybody knows this. I don't need like, nobody needs teaching on this or help with this. And then their exhortation was like, but somebody does. So I think that just kind of started, I just started kind of like thinking like, if I were to teach somebody, if somebody didn't know how to connect to God in their prayer time through movement, how would I teach that? And so I think I just started on Instagram, just kind of sharing some tips, sharing thoughts that I have, if this life from the enemy comes up, how do I deal with it? And it just kind of started organically growing where I started having more and more conversations with people. I think maybe a year into it, I created my first ebook,
Yeah.
which was just like a set of 5 just dance kind of, I call them dance devotionals, but it's basically movement meditations, and it gives you a scripture and a meditation and a movement prompt for dancers to just really kind of connect the dots of like, here's how I can meditate on the Lord in my body and as I'm dancing, not like separate,
Yeah.
but in the moment. Here's how I can do that. So I created that, but that took like a year and a half or something, from like conception of like, that would be cool. I could make an ebook,
Uh-huh.
And then like a year later, I think it finally released. And then a year after that, I think I was like, oh, what would be so cool is if I could get like a small group online and we could go through these together
Ooh,
and
yeah.
we could have discussions about them and we could do teachings. And then I was like, okay, that's a pie in the sky dream that'll happen like, in 10 years or
Yeah.
something. And then I think things just lined up where, my husband encouraged me. I got different encouragement. I got some business coaching. And then I realized like, oh, it's not that unfeasible.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, so we just started this online community and we're about 50 members right now from like all over the world, which is really insane. Just people in Europe or Egypt or Australia. And
So cool.
it's just
Yes.
the only common link we all have is that we're all like desperate to encounter God in our bodies.
Mhm.
So yeah, so now it's this online business that I'm trying to grow and figuring out how to do that while being a mom. And now I feel like I have way more and more vision and I'm like, oh my goodness, Lord, how do we do this?
Right. Yeah.
But it's really fun.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So, as far as your role, so you're doing like some writing and giving kind of resources for people, which is super cool. And then also looks like you do a little bit of speaking as well. And then I love the aspect of having kind of like the membership
Yeah.
group where people can join. I think it's just really cool, all the offerings that you're putting into the world. And
Thanks,
there
man.
is something I've seen definitely in my own life, just the power of having other people that are kind of in it with you,
Yeah.
even the power of having a coach and someone that's walking alongside. So, any stories or like how you've seen community play a part
Mm.
in transformation for people?
Oh yeah, man. So last year at this time, we held our first in-person retreat.
Ooh.
So I think it was about like 15 different women, and we all got into an Airbnb, and it was a whole weekend where we had worship and we had, holy yoga classes, and we had some teachings and workshops, and we just did a lot of dancing and communing and eating together. And I had 3 close friends that some of them had even paid for a ticket, but they kind of like unofficially came on as my staff.
Nice.
I didn't we never talked about it ahead of time. It was just like all of a sudden, I think in the midst of the weekend happening, I realized how much I was leaning on them and how much they were just like, it was just their nature to be like, to just kind of help with ministry time and help with everything.
Mhm.
And I remember leaving that weekend just feeling so covered. And the words that I felt that the Lord was giving me was just that He was doing all the heavy lifting.
Wow.
And I remember going into that weekend just feeling like, oh my gosh, okay, this is our first retreat. I have handled all the logistics, and I'm also coming up with all the creative topics, and I'm also teaching and leading dance. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot that was just kind of on my plate
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, I was like, Lord, if there's anything that's going to happen like worthwhile, anything lasting besides just like a fun weekend, it's got to be from you.
Mhm.
And I felt like so much of that happened because I had these 3 other women that came and just just were there, and they just fully poured into these other women. Like, they were just there to pour in and bless and honor and pray for, and
So cool.
they brought their salt. like
Yeah.
like it was
Yeah.
just so clear to me where I was like, okay. And I felt myself just so relaxed in being able to trust them and trust the Lord through them, that it was such a beautiful weekend. Like, that's one of my highlights of 2022, of just feeling like, okay, I did my best. And now I really am trusting God with the rest. But He did so much of the heavy lifting, like on a ministry side of things, on a
Mhm.
spiritual side.
Yeah.
So many people got breakthrough and felt seen, or had the Lord speak to them, and like, that's something you just can't plan. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably my biggest story as far as like community and just feeling the covering of community and the safety in community. Like
Right.
I'm not alone and I'm not
Mhm.
doing this alone. And I honestly, I'm like, after that experience, I'm like, I will never do this again without backup.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. Sounds so good. I'm like, okay, when's the next one? I want to try.
I
So
know,
cool.
man.
I
I was
love it.
like, I'm going to do it this year. And then I'm like, okay, we'll do it every other year for now.
Yes, that sounds good. Especially, I mean, okay, what are the ages of your kids right now?
My youngest is 6 months, so he's just started sleeping through the night. So
Okay.
I'm kind of starting to find my equilibrium again. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
my oldest is 2 years old.
Okay, yes. So you're in like in the thick of it right now. Yeah, maybe next year. That'll be great.
Yeah, I would
But
really
yeah,
love
no
to.
pressure, no pressure at all. But it'll be
You will receive an
fun.
invite, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. Yay. That'd be so fun. Just yeah, it sounds like super filling and such a great time to come together. And there is something about that when you just get people in a room and you feel like that common heart and ability to kind of hold each other or lift each other up, in those different ways. So
Mm.
something that I love to ask everyone that comes on the show is there something that's on your heart right now that you'd want to share with other artists? So anything you feel like the Lord is speaking to you that you want to share?
Yeah, I think if there was one thing I could say to dancers, it really would just be like, it is your highest calling is unto the Lord. And I think the way most dancers interpret that is that they're like, yeah, I'm going to dance for Jesus, and everything I do is to serve him and to glorify him. And that is true. But there is a unique, Jesus says, like, no longer do I call you slaves, but I call you friends. There's a unique shift that happens when you go from not just glorifying God with your dance and your vessel as like it's a tool and an instrument for him, but when you actually transition into communing with him
Yeah.
and speaking with him in your movement and receiving what he has to say as you move. And that's something that I like, if I could wave a magic wand, I would want to give everybody I know that gift, dancer and non-dancer, because there's so much freedom and release that
Mhm.
happens when you kind of come to a place of friendship. And I'll say, like, I oscillate between those constantly. My tendency towards religion is crazy. Like I will make a religion out of anything. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, oh, you gave me this like sweet word about rest. Well, I am gonna make myself rest. Like
It's so true.
I make everything this like rule-based performance legalistic thing.
Yeah.
It's so easy for me. But I'll say, like, I feel like the constant place where my heart gets pulled and where I would love to see more dancers set free in is that place of like, I'm gonna let the religion go and the legalism go, and I'm gonna move into a place of intimacy where, like, no longer am I gonna say, am I good enough for that company or that job or that thing, but I'm only gonna ask, are we a good fit for each other?
Mm.
Am I a good fit for them? Are they a good fit for me? Because my dance is too valuable to the Lord. My voice and my salt, it's too precious. Like, he loves it too much for me to belittle it or shame it or think that it's just like not good enough for something. Like, it might be that we're not the best fit. I'm not a good fit for the Joffrey Ballet.
Yeah, makes
you
sense.
know, but am I good enough? Like, that's not a question anymore. It's that communion that happens
Mm.
when, and the freedom that happens there when you're like intimate with God. So I think that'd be the biggest thing I would say to like any dancer is that if you can make it your mission to like get to know God inside of your movement, there's going to be worlds and oceans that just open up for you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love that. And such a good encouragement to each of us today. And just a fun final question is what is one of your favorite things right now?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this might sound kind of corny, and maybe it's because I judge myself for this, but recently I just started getting back into reading fantasy books.
Nice.
Yeah, I just finished this book. I read it when I was a teenager. No, that's not true. But I think it's a teen fiction book. But it's by Allie Carter, and it's this series called the Gallagher Girl
Okay.
series, and it's basically about these girls that grow up in a spy school.
Oh, cool. That's fun.
And so it's like
Mhm.
it's like a really fun, easy read, and it's just fun. And so that's just been giving me life to be like, I'm gonna go into a completely different world
Yeah.
that is just like it's very like teen drama. but also with spies involved.
Right. There is something there with like just being able to disconnect for a little bit and be somewhere else for a little while. I think that is a fun part of fiction, and yeah, and kind of restorative in a different way, maybe, especially when you're with little ones all day long. I'm sure it like kind of helps to have a little bit of just something different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good. Well, I would love to let people know where they can connect with you and with Being Salt. So what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. Well, I'm at being_salt on Instagram. So if you search Being Salt, you'll probably find me. I haven't been on Instagram recently because of giving birth to my second. So I've been kind of taking a hiatus. But if you go to beingsalt.com, there's a bunch of like freebies on there. There's a blog on there. There's links to a free dance devotional series if you're interested in like kickstarting your own relationship with like, how do I even talk to God, or how do I start that process? Or I did know that once upon a time, but I'm just out of practice. There's a few freebies on there that are just like basically ways to get that conversation going again. So yeah, beingsalt.com is a great place. I think you can sign up for my newsletter there as well. So I try to send people an email once every other week, just with an encouragement or a tip or a word from God that I'm feeling. Again, that's been a little bit less as of late because of my 6-month-old, but
makes sense for
I'm
sure.
getting back to that as well. So yeah, those are the places where you can kind of find me.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely put those in the show notes as well so people can find it. And just Tehillah, thank you so, so much for sharing your time and your heart with all of us today. And I'm just so excited to like officially know you and be able to connect, and that we're both in Houston. Like, this is so fun. So
thank you so much for having me on, Rachel.
That was so good. I left that conversation feeling so encouraged and inspired. And like I said, I even had gotten up that day and started putting what Tehillah is sharing about into practice. Be sure to connect with Tehillah on Instagram at being_salt, and check out her website, beingsalt.com, for that free movement meditation download. You can find all the links, the full show notes, and additional resources on our website, creativeimpactpodcast.com. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd be willing to take a minute or so and rate and review the show, that would be so amazing. It would be so fun to have some current reviews for the podcast, and it truly does help other people to find the show. As a reminder, we have a Patreon community where you can get bonus content as you help support the show with monthly donations. If you feel led to support the show, check it out at creativeimpactpodcast.com/PATREON. Another great way to support is to share the show with those in your life. Thank you so much for listening and being part of this Creative Impact Podcast community. Until next time, remember that you were designed to create. You were made to inspire. Continue living with purpose and making an impact. I'll see you next time, friends.